All right, well, why don't we get rolling with the paint session? So, yeah, today we're going to be talking about paint recycling, paint stewardship, all that good stuff. As anybody who knows me knows, I was involved in that field for many years, but have not been so involved the last couple of years. So I'll be pretty interested to hear sort of the latest and greatest and what's going on in the paint world. So I'm excited to hear our three speakers today. So we'll start with Brendan, then go to Jeremy, then go to Sanjeev. I think it's okay if we take a couple questions after each presentation. So if you do have questions, throw them into the Q&A and we'll maybe address a couple in between, but make sure to keep the session flowing. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. And Brendan, can you help me with your last name pronunciation, please?
Yes, it's Adamczyk.
All right, Brendan Adamczyk, thank you. So Brendan is with PSI, the Product Stewardship Institute. He works with state and local governments, businesses, and non-governmental organizations to design and implement producer responsibility legislation. And it says here you're a graduate of University of Oregon. So I did not realize that. I guess you've moved away from Oregon, but BS in Environmental Studies, minors in Geography and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. So take it away, Brendan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim. I actually am still based out of Portland. I joke I'm PSI's West Coast office. It's just me. So I have my little Oregon promotion there up behind me. So
did not know that. That's great.
So hi folks. Thanks for that introduction, Jim. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can put up my presentation. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to be sort of starting off this conversation by giving a brief overview of EPR, PSI, and paint stewardship. I know Jeremy and Sanjeev are going to go into much more detail on paint care and IPRA respectively, but I want to kind of give an overview and a brief history of how we've come to arrive here. I am an associate for policy and programs at the Product Stewardship Institute, so I work on paint recycling mainly, but I also work on EPR for a variety of other products in a bunch of states across the country. So I know some PSI folks have presented on other presentations at the conference today, but briefly just wanted to let everyone know, who PSI is. We're a nonprofit based out of Boston. We've been building the capacity for product stewardship and extended producer responsibility for more than 20 years. Our CEO and founder, Scott Cassell, worked in the solid waste field for 7 years in Massachusetts and entered product stewardship and EPR in 2000. PSI is an organization that's our board and our heart is really our government members from 47 state agencies and over 100 local governments. These are the folks that we represent in conversations, in stakeholder dialogues, and they sit on our board. But we also have more than 100 multi-stakeholder partners. These are manufacturers, retailers, NGOs, businesses, recyclers, and more who we work with on consulting projects, on dialogues, and on really, again, trying to build this capacity for product stewardship. And our work covers more than 25 different products. You gave some examples here you can see with these images, but I'm here today to talk about our work on paint. Briefly though, again, I'm sure folks have heard a lot about EPR and product stewardship over the past couple of days, but EPR really is the centerpiece of the circular economy as far as we're concerned. If we're trying to create this economy and create this solid waste system where we're reusing and recycling as much waste as possible, it's really important that we work to shift financial and management responsibility for end of life management of products from governments and taxpayers and onto producers and manufacturers. So similarly, EPR is a law, a product stewardship law that extends this, financial material responsibility of producers from just the products and the packaging in two directions, both, upstream to product design. We look at, design for environment, and sort of, friendlier product design, but also sort of more importantly, and, what really is the focus of today when it comes to paint recycling downstream to post-consumer reuse, recycling, and safe disposal. EPR laws are not new by any means. They've been around in the European Union, in Canada, and in Asia since the 90s. But in the US, there are 124 laws across 15 products in 33 states and the District of Columbia. As you can see here, certainly a focus in terms of these, oranges and reds and blues is kind of the higher density states, on the West Coast, on the Midwest, and, in the Northeast. But we do see that there are, product stewardship and, EPR laws across the whole country. And these range from, mercury auto switches and lamps to carpet, mattresses, leftover pharmaceuticals, just as of this year, packaging in Oregon and Maine, and of course, again, the focus of today, paint. So I wanted to provide just, a brief history, for those who don't know, or like Jim, maybe have sort of, stepped away for a couple of years from paint stewardship. But PSI, really wanted to focus on paint recycling and paint stewardship, and saw that there was, real interest and, real motivation from the paint industry in taking this responsibility. So, we, Scott, facilitated a national dialogue beginning in the early 2000s that resulted in two memorandums of understanding in 2005 and 2007. And these MOUs were signed by paint manufacturers, by the US EPA, local and state governments, recyclers, all the major stakeholders, along the recycled paint chain. And it included, model legislation. And, the overarching goal of this dialogue was to recognize not just that the paint industry should take this responsibility, but what that responsibility should, really look like. And as a result of this dialogue, the first paint stewardship law based on this model was passed in Oregon in 2009. This is something that, PSI played a role early, but really, was a major role was played by the paint industry in coming to the table and not just being willing to discuss, EPR for paint, but really, wanting to take on that full responsibility. And then if you look ahead, by 2011, there was increasing momentum on paint stewardship. There were 3 laws in 3 states, in Oregon, as mentioned, and also in California and Connecticut. And there were 5 bills across Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. So, as you can see, paint stewardship was beginning to grow, but it was certainly, still in the early stages. But if you jump ahead to this year, a decade later, you can see a lot of these states now have, turned blue here, are states with laws. There are now 11 laws in 10 states and the District of Columbia. And there are also 4 more states who had bills to, create new paint stewardship programs in 2021. In Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, and New Jersey. So as you can see, I'll jump back to the previous map and then jump ahead. In just a decade, paint stewardship has really exploded across the country, and really, showed, again, driven by paint recyclers growing and, developing recycled paint manufacturing, to the paint industry really taking that responsibility, and to local and state governments, learning more about the benefits of this program and wanting to expand it as much as possible. So the results, and I'm sure Jeremy will talk about this in more depth, but I wanted to just touch on it briefly. Paint Care has been a really successful program. Out of the 11 statewide programs, there have been more than $240 million in savings for local governments in avoided costs for transportation and processing of paint. There's been the establishment of more than 2,000 voluntary collection sites at HHW facilities, but also over 70% of those sites are retail locations, are hardware stores or retailers who are volunteering to collect paint. More than 50 million gallons of paint has been collected to date across all of the programs, which is an amazing achievement in a little over a decade. And overall, what we've seen is that communities with pre-existing paint recycling programs have received direct cost savings, and that they're no longer paying, or they're paying significantly less for paint recycling. But those that did not collect paint are now also receiving new recycling at no taxpayer cost. So this has not only been a benefit for those pre-existing HHW programs, but also really an exciting opportunity for a lot of different municipalities that, either for cost reasons or infrastructure reasons, were simply unable to collect paint before the program. Additionally, and this is something that I'm sure Sanjeev will touch on more as well, but as part of this growth in paint stewardship, there's also been a growing demand for recycled paint. Much of the paint coming out of these programs, more than 70% of the latex paint collected, is either reused or recycled. And so, we've really seen that the interest in and market for recycled paint has really grown dramatically. So in 2019, PSI developed the International Paint Recycling Association, or IPRA, in collaboration with recycled paint manufacturers. And this organization has really been, an exciting way for these recycled paint manufacturers to represent themselves on a national and international scale, and really, continue to develop their markets further. IPRA, has testified on a number of paint stewardship bills, really weighing in on legislation to bring about more paint stewardship and, increase recycled paint. They recently released a 2020 annual report authored by PSI that, highlighted how IPRA recycled nearly 5 million gallons of paint in the past year. And that, that paint being recycled has resulted in significant greenhouse gas emission savings, water savings, and job creation. And IPRA is also very exciting, is finalizing a certification process. And what this process will show, and as you can see from this logo in the bottom right, is that paint from IPRA members will, be recycled paint that will be shown to be high quality, and will ensure that the recycled paint market, as it continues to grow, is really just producing, high quality paint that really, is the best representation of the market and the manufacturers as a whole. So PSI, one of the ways that we've really tried to work to, further paint stewardship and the, national conversation around paint EPR is through our government strategy calls. Now, these are calls that we facilitated for more than 20 years with our government members, local and state government members. And the idea really here is to, provide technical assistance and to discuss key issues, successes, obstacles, and, lessons learned with EPR laws. And these conversations are great because they, include states that already have laws. They include states that are in the process of implementing laws, like right now, New York State is in the final stages of implementing their paint stewardship law. And they also include states that are considering laws, like, as I mentioned before, Illinois or Missouri. And beginning in late 2020, PSI began facilitating monthly calls with the Paint Government Strategy Group to really, again, bring these discussions around paint EPR and make sure that we're keeping the movement and these laws on the cutting edge of EPR. And these conversations were great, and they really developed, like I said, the understanding among these three key groups. But they also illuminated some of the main challenges, opportunities and obstacles with paint stewardship moving forward. Now, there were 6 key issues in no particular order, but these are the key issues that we saw emerge out of this conversation that are really things to keep an eye on as paint stewardship continues to grow and spread across the country. The first is the inclusion of aerosol paints. Aerosols were actually discussed, but initially included from those memorandums of understanding that I discussed back in the mid-2000s, in part because their manufacturers are different from the paint industry, the American Coating Association, but also because, as I'm sure a lot of folks know here, there are some complexities with managing aerosol cans as opposed to paint, and discussions about whether or not they should be included in household hazardous waste EPR instead of paint EPR. There's also been a recognition of a need to incorporate more multi-stakeholder input. As newer EPR programs have passed, they've often included advisory councils, composed of local and state governments, recyclers, environmental organizations, community organizations, and there's been conversations about whether paint care moving forward should consider advisory councils. There's also been discussion about how to maximize leftover paint to make sure it's recycled back into more paint to support the circular economy. And this is certainly something, again, we've seen that over the years, paint care is consistently recycling high rates of latex paint. But we want to make sure, especially from the IPRA perspective, that as much paint as possible is being recycled back into more paint. Fourth, there's been some conversations about maximizing the recycling of paint containers. We've seen some states that have mandated or otherwise encouraged the recycling of these containers. But moving forward, and I think especially as we're seeing EPR for packaging passed, which often excludes these containers in states that have paint EPR laws, there's been ongoing conversations about whether these containers should be recycled, and if so, how that would work. Fifth, there's been the importance, governments want to make sure that paint care is not spending the assessment funds, the assessment funds that they're collecting for the program, either on industry lawsuits or on the payment of fines against paint care, This isn't something that has been a problem yet, but it's something that, has emerged in some other EPR programs and, other laws, and has been something that, our government members want to keep an eye on. And ultimately, there's just, overall, Paint Care has done a very good job of having dialogue with stakeholders. And, we saw from our governments that they want to make sure that this ongoing dialogue continues and that there continues to be, this great communication that we've seen between our government members, the paint industry, and recycled paint manufacturers. And PSI, as I've mentioned, has done a lot of work on furthering paint stewardship. We've conducted some evaluations of stewardship programs in California, Connecticut, Minnesota, and Oregon, working alongside our state and local level partners and also the product stewardship councils in those states. What we've seen out of that is that, majority of HHW programs, of retailers, of transfer stations, of these large volume sites, and even of residents all report, high levels of satisfaction with the program. So ultimately, in the states that we've looked at and the programs that have passed and have been going on for years, we see that these programs have been very popular. And that's in addition, obviously, as I touched on earlier, to all of the, successes in terms of paint collected and paint recycled by Paint Care. PSI has also been working to lay the groundwork in Missouri and Illinois with our state product stewardship councils there. We facilitated a virtual paint stewardship summit in Missouri last year. And this fall, we're actually working on a really exciting opportunity to paint, some high visibility structures in some towns across Missouri with recycled paint to really, highlight the quality of that recycled paint and, raise awareness about paint stewardship and the Paint Care program. And, lastly, we work with our state and local government members, with IPRA and with others to provide as much testimony and technical expertise as we can on these laws. We see that a lot of folks often have some misunderstanding about what the law looks like, but pretty much regardless of the stakeholder, when they hear about what the program can do and its success, we've just seen that folks are excited about it and they want to hear how they can bring it to their state. Lastly, I just wanted to close, this is something, PSI does this work for a lot of folks, for, manufacturers, recyclers, retailers, NGOs. We offer, partnership where we can work on, alliances, policy analysis, this kind of technical expertise and support. For governments, we offer membership. So that's obviously inclusion in those government strategy calls, not just on paint, but on other issues as they arise, like pharmaceuticals, or batteries, electronics, and so on. And also, access to a lot of, webinars and our, newsletters and legislative updates. And lastly, as I mentioned, whether it's evaluations or otherwise, PSI does do consulting work, along the lines of research, building these kind of stakeholder dialogues or, developing policies around paint stewardship or any of the other 25 products that we work on. I hope that provided a good overview, of paint recycling, history of paint stewardship, and what PSI sees as the direction moving forward. Happy to answer some questions here, and otherwise, really looking forward to hearing more from Jeremy and Sanjeev.
All right, thank you, Brendan. Yeah, I mean, PSI is basically the reason that there is Paint Care. If you go back to the early 2000s and Scott Cassell's tenacity in convening all the stakeholders, and without just years of dedicated effort from PSI, I don't think Paint Care ever would have happened. So thank you for that history and update there. We do have a fair amount of time, so let's go ahead and take. We did get one question come in. The question is about pricing of paint. Has there been an effort made to address paint pricing? The cost of a gallon costs about as much as a couple pints, and so as a concern that might generate more waste. I don't know if Brendan, you have any thoughts about that, and maybe Sanjeev or Jeremy as well. I know that was a topic in some of the paint dialogues way back when, but I think that's a tough angle to address. But Brendan, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, and then Sanjeev, I see you unmuted here, so feel free to jump in afterwards. But I think, not necessarily so much on the pricing level, but I see, part of this question is also about, overbuying. And I would say that's something I do know the Paint Care program has focused on, is educating, retailers, but also residents and contractors about what the, correct amount of paint is to buy for a program. Paint Care actually has a really great, listing of resources on their website for folks that are looking, to paint a project, how to make sure they're buying the right amount of paint, and then also making sure when they are buying that paint, where it goes at end of life. So I do think there's been a lot, outside pricing that the paint care program and that manufacturers have done to, make sure that folks know as much as possible how much paint to buy, and also, where it should go at the end of life. But Sanjeev, I don't know if you have any thoughts on pricing or. Yeah.
No, Brandon, thank you. But you have covered it very well. I just wanted to add one point that yes, in a gallon of paint, there has been studies going on that, you always end up having a little bit more paint than you require, because 1 gallon of paint normally covers from 350 to 400 square feet. And when we paint a room, it's a little bit more paint than normally a room would require. So there has been some studies that yes, a gallon of paint may be a little bit more. So it can be something like where a half a gallon, which is not a packaging size that we see in America, but we see that in Europe. And we have seen people embracing a half a gallon of paint or even 3 liters, because definitely there has to be more education on buying right. But if there are more options available on packaging, I think it is certainly a step in the right direction, because that limits, having over purchase and then at the same time, more waste.
Yeah, and I really give Paint Care credit for including buy right as part of their public outreach campaign. I think that's really great. Jeremy, I don't know if you want to add anything to this question.
Well, I can add one thing just to note that one of the key facets of the last couple of years has been a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands and a lot of projects to tackle at home. And that's been reflected in the sales of paint. One interesting thing to note has been a considerable drift, since most of the new paint purchasing is happening with DIYers and homeowners, it seems. A demonstrable and noted drift to smaller container size purchasing during the pandemic. So I guess we could say people are somewhat rational in this regard, in that they are assessing their project needs, and the numbers don't lie. That the purchasing behaviors have adapted. But to Sanjeev's point, having something in between those two sizes, more customer choice couldn't be a bad thing to help right size the project. Again, we have it's embedded in the messaging. We shout it from the hills and through all our marketing materials to buy the right amount. But of course, if packaging could help make that would be something we would be happy to rein in and support.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we got another questions which we'll take, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. So a question about upcoming states, why Missouri and Illinois? And the questioner says that infrastructure is stronger in some of the other states. So why are Missouri and Illinois kind of queued up next?
Yeah, well, I think, a big part of that is about, those are the places that PSI has some, really important pre-existing relationships. I know, Sanjeev, GDB International is based in Illinois. So that's obviously a, big motivator to pursue paint stewardship there. PSI has also been working for years with the Illinois Product Stewardship Council. We worked with them on pharmaceuticals EPR many years ago, and several members of that council have served on PSI's board. So it's really, in Illinois about those pre-existing relationships. And I think in Missouri, what we're excited about there is that, there is this really, I see, actually, it's funny, Amanda just chimed in, beat me to it, that there is a lot of interest there from stakeholders in paint stewardship. And I think Missouri is also an interesting, case because, Missouri is a more conservative state. And as I mentioned, EPR more broadly, but especially, is something that we haven't really often seen in some of these conservative leaning states. I think Missouri is a great place to see that, paint care is something that, should be popular, across states. Rural states also suffer from a lack of access to collection infrastructure. And so I think, we really see these two states as places that have a lot of interest from stakeholders and some of those pre-existing relationships, but also as some kind of great test cases for how we can grow paint stewardship moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I do see one more question, but it is kind of paint care related. So let's hold it till after Jeremy's presentation. So let's do Jeremy's intro here. So Jeremy Jones is West Coast Program Manager for Paint Care. So that includes California, Oregon, and starting just a few months ago, Washington. So now the whole West Coast is paint care country. Previously, he helped get the Minnesota program up and running. And then before that, he worked at Hennepin County in Minneapolis area, focusing on environmental programs and legislation to address carbon emissions reduction, material management, recycling. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Gustavus Adolphus College and a master's of urban and regional planning from the University of Minnesota. So with that, up to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jim. Great to see you again. And I wanted to maybe follow up on Brendan's last point about, before I dive into my presentation about new states, because it's just fresh in my mind because we just started up in Washington. And because somebody had mentioned, I think Amanda mentioned that in Illinois, some paint stores have been collecting paint for a while. And I have to say that was actually one of the better features of the state of Washington's rollout, was the fact that King County had, in laying the groundwork for the paint program in Washington, had started a Take It Back network. And I think they've done this for other materials as well, again, just to lay the groundwork, get people in the habit of taking back materials to retail. I think they had done this with fluorescent light bulbs previously, sort of as a canned strategy, if you will, to sort of usher in a new era. And I have to say, it really worked in terms of the stores transitioning from being voluntary take-back locations under the county's program into paint care sites over time. And so wanted to just kind of give a shout out to both to the two counties in Washington that did that, took that effort, King County in the Seattle area, and then Clark County in southwestern Washington, Vancouver, Portland area, also had a take-back network, sort of pre-baked, if you will, and I couldn't have been any better in terms of transition and moving forward. So kind of perhaps some future advice for folks in other states looking to lay some groundwork. So I'm going to just share my screen and hopefully it'll work out. All right, can everyone see the screen?
Looks good, Jeremy.
Okay, great. All right, so I will try as best as possible not to repeat the previous presentation, although there is definitely some overlap there. And but I'll talk about paint care's first 10 years, and then I'm going to focus a lot on where things have gone and are going, if you will. So the first 10 years of the program, again, try not to rehash too much here, but from our perspective, what we want to make clear for those who are new, maybe not in a paint care state, is to know that paint care itself is a subsidiary of the ACA, which is shorthand for the American Coatings Association. And it was formed in 2009. Basically, once that dialogue got off the ground, Oregon passed paint stewardship legislation, and paint care was formed to address that. The implementation requirements are varying from state to state, so that is part of our job, is to try to understand what each law does and do so on behalf of the manufacturers. Paint care itself is a 501c3 organization, shorthand for a public benefit nonprofit, and we, basically that's our focus, is the pure public benefit of these programs. ACA is the one who conducts government affairs activities on behalf of paint care. So kind of bright lines between what we do and what they do. And we are governed by a board of directors that represent architectural paint manufacturers. This is a bit of a repeat, but I wanted to just, from Adam's presentation, but I just want to add to this, that the key thing that happened, I think, during this time, and again, I can't say I was present at the genesis of it, but one of the things that happened during this period of time was this build out of stewardship programs for other materials or legislation pursuant to materials such as electronics. And I think the sort of catch can, I'm sorry if that's, I don't mean that as a pejorative, but just the different nature of every state's law with regard to electronics I think, compelled motivation from the paint industry to try to make the laws as similar as possible, and come up with a model legislation. I'll hit that in the next slide. But I say that because when I worked for Hennepin County, one of my key job focus areas was to oversee Hennepin County's contribution to the electronic stewardship program. And yeah, it was, a different type of program than the one you're going to find in other states and California's. Reporting requirements, goals, everything else kind of different. Minnesota's was its own, not a criticism, just it was its own thing. And so I think that was probably one of the driving forces behind getting paint care programs to look as similar as they can to the others, while respecting, of course, the individuality of each state's infrastructure. So here's the big picture of where paint care is, and I will say that while the number of states here is certainly not as many as I would hope to see, in terms of population, when we add the fourth highest population state being New York, paint care will be in states that are home to 90 million people, roughly 27% of the United States population. So we'll have the first and fourth most populous states. And then, of course, as a Midwesterner for many, many years, to Amanda's point on the chat, I think that it would be great to see more programs in the Midwest. Minnesota is a great state, but it shouldn't be the only state in that area to try to build on the success, and a lot of lessons learned in the Midwest. So it can be done, and hopefully will. The program's goals, again, this is mainly for folks who aren't in paint care states joining us today, is that we're just trying to kind of tick all the boxes that stand in the way of paint being managed responsibly today in many states, or as robustly as it could be. So recycling, loud and clear, it needs to be easier, especially for leftover paint, which can be hard to move around, not super hard to move around as a mattress per se, or carpets or things like that. But still, it's got weight, and it can be messy too. So certainly the costs were addressed by Adam. The need for paint management costs for state and local governments that were born for many, many years, or in the case of states that don't manage paint today, just making sure that that is something that doesn't have to be borne by local governments or state governments. And then the education piece, it's really one of the bigger pieces of our effort. The thing that maybe wouldn't have been done in the past for lack of funding. We do put a considerable amount of effort into getting the word out about for consumers to first reduce, then reuse, and then only then recycle leftover paint, keeping those messages front and center. And then, of course, to manage it responsibly, all of the material. So here are the assets of the model legislation. A level playing field. This is very similar. This is sort of the core, when product stewardship was being drawn up, or EPR is being drawn up by the OECD many moons ago. The key here was to make sure that no one gains a competitive advantage through this activity. It's for a public benefit, and no one should necessarily be profiteering or anything like that from this. It's meant to be a level playing field, and that makes it more palatable from many angles. Consistent program requirements, I think, is clear. More operational efficiencies. We can really make sure that it's the same as much as possible. Of course, not possible to make it completely the same, but where there are synergies or where there's ability to make it the same, let's try and do that through the law. And then, really the key here, I think, thanks, Jim, for the credit here, to try to manage this in partnership with state agencies, but really to take the burden on, and happily so, to try to manage this program, learn from lessons of the past, and meet the expectations of our stakeholders, and thus be the ones to do it, and not have to rely on others necessarily to have to take care of this issue, because it is a manufacturer generated situation. And then, of course, the antitrust provisions, kind of deep in the weeds, but that is definitely a piece of this as well, to make sure that the funding mechanism can be propagated without antitrust concerns. So how does the funding mechanism work? It is funded through a fee on new paint sales. I'll talk about that in a second, kind of how that varies from state to state. But it kind of works down the retail chain, cascades through from wholesaler down to retailer down to customer. It is collected sort of even before the customer actually pays it. It is really just passed down through the retail chain, and therefore ensures that it is taken care of and not reliant necessarily on that final transaction at the till. It is state specific, so and I'll go into that in a second. But it's set to cover the cost but not exceed the cost of operating the program. And so because of that, fees may change over time. So now we're 10 years into this program, and they are changing, and they have changed, and we're seeing that they will adapt, and gladly they haven't had to change too much don't want to create a whipsaw effect for people or burdens on printing new brochures or other types of things that go into changing fees, but overall try to show that we do adapt to the times. So the fee structure, as it plays out, this is sort of the whole gamut of what we see right now, is 3 size containers, small, mid, and large, and you can see they're not proportional to size based on the fact that some of the larger containers tend to be part of contractor type projects, and therefore we don't see as much left in those containers because of the nature of those projects. But here's the ranges: 35 cents to 49 cents for quarts, pints and quarts, 75 to 99 for mid-sized containers. Traditionally gallons, although some areas do sell a 2-gallon container. And then larger sizes up to 5, $1.60 to $1.99. And this will, I believe, change. California's fee is on the low end of this, and it will go lower. But in other states such as Oregon and Vermont, and also Washington, we see a higher fee, as well as Minnesota, higher fee structure, just based on really the popularity of the program, if you could say, in these states, and also some deeper elements, such as sort of the timing of when larger programs came on board. It was sometimes inundated the program right up front with material. So it varies from state to state, but we're trying to merge the container size, make sure it's very consistent from state to state wherever we can. The system itself is broad-based, so it isn't just one type of site, because people do take materials and are used to taking materials in different places. Paint and hardware stores, more than 1,500 across the 10 programs. Municipal household hazardous waste facilities and events. I'll catalog those later, sort of the totals. We also have a lot of paint collection events in underserved areas, as well as a large volume pickup service. So kind of the gamut of services, and we're still trying to build this out, see if we can figure out different ways to reach people. I don't want to forget the middle bullet point about sort of those solid waste facilities that aren't HHWs. Those are very, very important part of the program. So I guess to say, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, not an HHW facility, can I participate in this program? Absolutely. We have any type of configuration, we've probably seen it. Here's that list of covered products. So on the left, we've got the latex paints, oil-based, sealers, stains, lacquers, and varnishes. And on the right, the products that are not part of the program. The aforementioned aerosols, auto and marine paints, thinners, and solvents are non-paint products, but more paint-adjacent products. And then the program also doesn't take any industrial coatings. And then at retail anyway, we don't take any leaking or empty non-labeled paints. Outreach, as I mentioned, is a big part of this program. And here's just an example of, a sign that you might see at a location. A whole litany of outreach and education. I'll actually catalog that a little bit in a second. We're going to talk about our new brand identity. But here's kind of the scope of what we offer to the public. Typical point of sale materials, brochures, and things like that. A very popular site locator, zip code based. Should also add, we do maintain that site locator even in non-paint care states. I just want to make sure that's noted, because that's something that doesn't exist, did not exist prior to paint care. So if you look up, I don't know, like Las Vegas, Nevada, or something like that, you'll see, the catalog of facilities outside of pain care states, and I think that's a really good thing. I appreciate to be able to tell people if they call from a non-pain care state, at least where today they might be able to go, even if it might be a bit further out than in a pain care state. So, and we do stay quite involved in contractor meetings. The people who are buying a good chunk of the paint, and we also very much pride ourselves on being part of conferences like NAMA, community events, regional, and again, always looking out for a new place where maybe people haven't heard of us before, a new audience, be they realtors, be they people in the outdoor, sort of generally speaking, outdoor people involved in home maintenance and things like that. And then also leveraging municipal programs and their outreach. In Washington, it's been very popular for local governments to buddy up with pain care to try to reach new audiences or old audiences. The program itself, because of the nature of it being a nonprofit, we run a fairly lean operation in terms of like, what are we spending our money on? 75 to 80% of the money is going straight to the big three, if you will: collection, transportation, and processing, the recycling, the bins, the core parts of the program. We do set aside about 10% to 15% for the aforementioned education, and then about 10% for administration. And then pain care, or a lot of staff is based in DC at the corporate level, and we leverage that resource, and that's allocated kind of on a proportion of the population. So here are the big takeaways, and on the right here, I've got sort of highlight a kind of a summary of the top line type of outcomes that we see. Typical pain care state. So Connecticut, we're looking at them. That we kind of try to do this for each state to show how well people are served in terms of coverage, how much paint goes back into paint, and so the top line numbers here. The big picture, craning out just a bit, over 50 million gallons, as Adam mentioned. I want to highlight here 10 million gallons yearly with the addition of Washington, with the addition of New York. So it's poised to double that number, that 50 million gallon number, by the year, within about 5 years. Again, top line on recycling, 75% of the latex paint is recycled or reused. Pretty proud of that number. Not a lot of materials are that recyclable, so it's helpful for paint that it is usable and useful. And Sanjeev will definitely go into that, his side of the system. And then reuse, of course, is a huge focus for us. So we're continuing to build that wherever it's possible. Large volume pickup program, 5,200 of those. I'll talk more about that in a second, but that's a big sort of add that this program didn't exist. Free pickups for people who it'd be easier for us to go get the material. 1,500 new return to retail locations as part of this program across the 10 states. 375 HHW solid waste facilities, and then to get to over 2,000, some other different types of sites that bring us up to that total. And then one-day events, HHW programs, cornerstone of a lot of HHW programs, municipal programs. 4,800 of those since the start of the program have been supported by Paint Care, and we've done 200 of our own. The brand itself has been updated. This program is, again, as others have noted, been very popular, but it has, been a decade. So it would seem like it was time to take a rethink of the program branding itself. Don't change the program, but just change the branding. And so this is the new look that you'll see if you go to paintcare.org. And I think it better reflects the program's identity, the objectives, and then we added a new tagline called "Recycling Made Easy" to focus on the convenience aspect of this program. We do phase public outreach in new states, and just to be clear, it kind of comes in gradually over the first year. Washington, it's the first year. It's word of mouth is all the marketing that Paint Care needs at this point in the state of Washington. So kind of let the program kind of percolate, and then begin outreach in future years, because the program has been, in many cases, hotly anticipated, as it was in Washington. Could be different in other states, but that's been our experience, is to try not to not trying not to create crowds at stores because they already are going to be there, and concentrating outreach within the core the core areas, especially among local governments and other core stakeholders who are going to be trying to manage this intake of the program. So the message platform is to first focus on buy right, use it up, and recycle the rest. And these correlate roughly to these ideas in the waste world of source reduction, reuse, and end-of-life options. That's our kind of spin on this. So we really try to hammer this home through point of sale materials. As you can see, here's a counter mat, a poster, our new brochure look, a little bit more focus on blue, I think, than green before. Just try to keeping up with the times, I guess, and maybe just changing it up a little bit. Really popular, these materials, good feedback. These were developed in consultation with folks, some test groups, and to see what would work with them. And we're pretty proud of these. I think they look really, really fresh, really inviting. And I think, this is a good example of the mailer in the middle. So here's for Tillamook County, HHW, Pacific City True Value. So this would be on the Oregon coast. This would be places where you could take paint, and direct mailers are super popular way to reach people. Just going to talk a little bit about evolving the program, as we kind of talked about where, kind of where we're at. We have, I guess the brand update is part of that evolution of the program, but I want to highlight a few areas where we have changed. The large volume pickup, and I appreciate Rick Gilbert for mentioning how it's a benefit actually not only to the people that receive the pickup, but also to people who are not receiving the pickup. So two beneficiaries of these large volume pickups where paint care just goes out, whether it's contractor, it's haulers, go out to a site and package material up and take it to recycling, is on sites that take paint from the public day by day, walk-in traffic, be the HHW facilities, solid waste facilities, or retail stores. We actively try to sort of recruit people, refer people to these large volume pickups. And when we started the program, it was 300 gallons, and definitely got a goodly number of requests from that, but lowering it steadily. I think we tried 200 and then eventually down to 100. That's really proved to be very useful. We get more people in the door, and we also, basically don't have to make exceptions anymore. We can just say yes to more people, and then pick them up. So the way it works is you set an appointment after you've filed your request, and it usually takes about 5 to 10 business days after it's all situated to get the material taken away. This is useful, again, I emphasize, not just for big contractors or painters, but also for schools, universities, public works, ports, and the list goes on. Hotels, property managers, prisons, anything you can think of, casinos. It's all there. And then I want to add in the last bullet point that there is a service for recurring customers. So large industrial operations, maybe they don't generate a lot of paint, but maybe a couple times a year they need to refresh their physical plant or something like that. There is a service for those folks where they can have on-site storage. I think the first one I was involved in, at least trying to set up, was prototypical example was, I think, the Mall of America in the state of Minnesota. Just a huge facility, lots to do, and a little bit of paint always needing to get taken care of. We've also done a once over on our training. Our training, I thought, was pretty good at the start, but I think we've learned that visual learning is much more effective. And so the whole concept, I remember going to these initial meetings saying, do this, don't do that, as like the core thing that everybody just wants to know. So it's a small thing, perhaps, but the site trainings being revised to be more visual and responsive to the feedback of stakeholders throughout the years is a big change. Also, feedback from stakeholders is we could definitely use some help in figuring out where to put this material. The boxes that we use are, standard ag-sized, cubic yard boxes, Gaylords you see in a lot of places. They don't always they're not always compatible with retail locations. And so we have some different solutions on the screen for infrastructure support that we've provided, both to retail locations as well as to municipal programs who maybe just need a little site improvement in order to get that program fully effectuated at their location. So maybe you could only take one box in the store, but if you had something like this, you could actually have multiple boxes and be able to have less frequent pickups, things like that. From the container management side, I think Adam hit on this. It's an area of research right now we're looking at, and the recycling rates do vary from program to program. For example, in Oregon, 65% of the available containers are recycled. And that varies, some more, some less in other states. And we've talked to every processor regarding the fate of the paint containers to try to identify the barriers and the keys to recycling. And ACA itself has engaged a professional consultant to talk about how containers are currently being managed and figuring out how we can work to increase the recycling rate. The research project is ongoing, and it should be ready to be concluded in the next few of months. Sorry for the typo there, but we should have the results of that study pretty soon. In many states, the recycling rate is pretty high. In other states, it's not as high, and so we're just trying to figure out where those barriers are, because it is quite likely possible with perhaps some small adaptations. Also, last thing I kind of want to talk about here, or last couple things, is a grant program that we put out a couple years ago, a competitive grant to develop new methods for recycling that sort of weird fraction of paint that can't go into new paint. Not useful for that, but it also isn't necessarily done yet. There's something else we could do with it. And we asked folks to kind of bring us their ideas, and we'd offer some grant support for that. And this is the result. It was used for making some precast molds to make landscape decor, do some marketplace research, figure out how marketable this type of product would be, and to showcase this at a national trade show. The result is, pretty clear. These types of products can be 40% lighter, lightweighting the products, in addition to being a vessel for recycling. And then one final highlight here, this is something that's become more and more popular over time. Got the King County program here, where we've partnered with King County to do a joint outreach program. So basically folks do a proposal to us, and we're pretty open to it. We're doing a lot of these in Washington from some very innovative programs who want to find new ways to reach their public, and we're all for it. We love this type of, bring us an idea and help us to, let us support it financially. So I think it's really a great thing that's out there for folks in new states or even old states, paint care states who are interested in getting every bit that they can out of this program. With that, I will end my presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Jeremy, and a really great, thorough discussion of paint care and what you're up to, and hopefully some of the people who are in non-paint care states might be getting excited and motivated to try and get paint care legislation in their state. So I do want to launch into some questions, and I want to start with maybe a tough question, but before I do that, thanks so much for being a sponsor, Paint Care, sponsoring our conference here. We appreciate that. Sponsorship definitely helps us be able to do what we do here. So with that, I'll give you a little bit of a tough question. So Brendan mentioned adding aerosols to care. That's something that I also hear as part of the NAMA policy committee. Hear a lot of support for that idea. Can you tell us what Paint Care's perspective on that idea is?
Yeah, so definitely it's been always the intent to add aerosols to the program at a point in time. I think out of the MOU and that it was discussed that it was going to be something to be added to the program at a future date. And I think one of and that PSI would be a party to making sure that it was done sort of in the right way and with the advice of stakeholders, and to figure out, again, what would be the best way to do it. Would it be part of the Paint Care program? Would it be its own program? Things like that. So at this point, I think, and there was also some, I think some other groundwork that ACA, again, just want to draw a line between Paint Care and ACA, that ACA, this is kind of their bailiwick, is to try to lay some groundwork on the federal side to have aerosols be considered as universal waste, which would help the adoption of it sort of not in just one state, but in sort of all paint care states. And that was one of the perceived barriers. So that's been moving along. The recognition of aerosols as a category as universal waste. So I think overall it's getting about time to take a look at that again. Again, in sort of tandem with PSI and other stakeholders to figure out sort of the roadmap for aerosols in the paint care program. So I think nothing's changed in terms of our perspective on it. It's just maybe about the time and the timing, and seems like it's kind of heading in that direction.
Great to hear. Thank you. So let's see, let's do Julie's question. So her question is about, are there coordinated efforts between manufacturers and paint care to push recycled paint as a high quality product? I know that can be a little bit challenging, and paint care's got some issues with pushing recycled paint sales in any way, but can you address that question, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, as the nonprofit arm of the paint industry, it's really kind of an area that we try to assiduously stay apart from the part of marketing paint products. It's gotten us into some touchy situations where people identify us, even without our trying to do so, with paint companies. And if we walk into one paint company store and they think that we're representing another paint company or group of paint companies, for paint care itself, it creates problems. So that's my answer. So
you're leaving it to others to promote the recycled paint and kind of staying out of that.
Well, the word push is a sort of a freighted word. We do provide a list of where you can buy recycled paint, and we maintain that list, and we keep it up to date. So I don't want to say like, hey, we're like, it's not that type of thing. It's really more what is appropriate for a nonprofit to be doing in this space, and certainly letting people know where they can do this and letting people know this is where the material goes. And here's where you can buy it. I think those are fairly safe spaces for a nonprofit to be in.
Thank you. Let's see, we have a question about that study, the research study about recycled paint marketability. That sounds like an intriguing study. And the question is, who's your consultant that's doing that work?
I can't say, actually, because that's because I don't want to say. I just don't know, because I'm not involved in the ACE's study right now. They just kind of gave me a briefing on where they're at with it, but I'm not involved with the ACE's study on that.
All right, and one more question before we move on to Sanjeev. So this is about containers. Does the container research that ACA is conducting go beyond recycling of existing packaging, looking at developing other less wasteful paint delivery systems?
I'm going to have to refer to my last answer. I'm not familiar with ACA's study on that, but I mean, based on what I've said, I think it's mainly focusing on the material that's coming in and from the existing product space, and how best to manage that, and how basically to perhaps achieve the same results that we're seeing in some of the states like Oregon, where the recycling rate is quite high.
All right, well, we'll just have to look for that. Is that going to be publicly available, or do you know?
I don't believe they decided whether or not to make it publicly available.
Okay.
But I did ask that question, knowing that question might be asked.
Yeah.
I said, is this going to be made public? I'm not really sure if they're going to make it public.
We'll see. I hope it is. Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. We're going to move on to Sanjeev now. Sanjeev Bagaria is founder and CEO of GDB International. And thank you also to GDB for being a great sponsor and supporter of NAMA over the years and helping us do these conferences. So we really appreciate that. So it says that GDB is the world's largest paint recycling company. It's headquartered out of New Jersey. Sanjeev oversaw its transformation from a humble family-run business to a global corporation, almost 2 million square feet, recycling centers employing over 450 personnel. Sanjeev graduated from the Wharton School of Management and has been CEO of GDB since 1993. He credits his passion for paint and vast knowledge of recycling as two pillars of GDB's foundation. He's also one of the founders and current president of IPRA, the International Paint Recycling Association. I hope we're going to hear a little bit more about how things are going with that organization. And so he closes with talking about his commitment to a zero waste paint industry. So that's quite a vision there, Sanjeev. That sounds good. So take it away, Sanjeev.
Thank you so much, Jim. Yes. I think, Jim, you can see my presentation on the screen, right?
Yes, you are good.
Perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank NAMA for providing me this platform to discuss about the evolution of paint recycling in circular economy. So my presentation today, I would like to basically discuss about how overall the paint recycling is done and where does the paint recycling stand in the current segment of the paint industry. And so broadly, the 5 points that I'm going to discuss today is one, briefly talk about the overview of the paint and the coatings industry, the environmental hazards and industry problems, and evolution of paint recycling in circular economy, how paint recycling has evolved, especially in the last decade, the challenges that are faced currently in the paint recycling industry, and lastly, looking forward, what is the future, where is the future lies of the paint in the paint recycling, a step in the right direction.
Sanjeev, we have a request. Can you make that full screen? Is that something you're able to do?
You can do that.
View, under the view.
Yeah, if you go to view, it should give you up at the top.
Yeah.
Yep. And then full screen mode.
There we go. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
Thank you.
So this slide here, we talk about the global architectural coatings market. And currently right now in the year 2020, the global architectural coating market stands at 65 billion. And just in the next 5 years, the global market will reach up to $85 billion. So you can see a sizable industry of architectural coatings globally. And in this slide here, we're showing you the volume of architectural paint that is consumed in the United States. And you can see that in 2020, just in the US, 850 million gallons of paint were consumed in architectural coatings. And this will reach to 1 billion gallons as per the study in the next 5 years. This slide here, something to give a different perspective. And we will see that the per capita paint consumption, and in USA, we are consuming about 36 to 38 pounds of paint per capita. And compared to, say, a country like in Indonesia or in India, where the consumption is only 7 to 8 pounds. So since US consumes the highest amount of paint per capita, it is also our responsibility, I believe, to set up a robust product stewardship program in the paint industry. In the last 10 years in the paint industry, a lot of, I would say, significant improvements or efforts have happened that have reduced the adverse impact on the environment. I mean, today, when we talk about in the US, more than 90% of the architectural coating sales is now water-based. We are hardly seeing solvent-based products being consumed in the DIY market. Architectural coatings, maybe in the next 4 or 5 years, we'll see pretty much about 100% of the paint will be water-based, a big step in the right direction. 97% of all the waste solvent, wash solvents that are generated in the paint plants are now being reclaimed, or they are being, you can say not incinerated, but they have been distilled to get the solvents out. So it's like kind of recycling rather than just being sent for burning. Low VOC paint standards have been implemented in the industry throughout, which now we are seeing in more and more states are implementing lower VOC standards. And the total quantity of the utilities, whether it is electricity, heat, and power consumed in the paint and the coating sector has decreased almost by 18 to 20% in the last 5 years. So certainly in the last 10 years, when we see there has been major improvements, which I would say is certainly a step in the right direction in the paint industry. However, today when we talk about architectural paint programs and architectural coatings industry, one of the sad things that I see today is that 10% of the total paint purchased by consumer in the United States, almost about 75 to 80 million gallons of paint goes unused. And this unused paint is a huge problem today in the industry, finding its place in landfills rather than getting it recycled, which I will talk more in my slides in future, in later, that recycling of the paint, when it can be done in a pretty, I would say not an easy way, but at least if so much of recycling is possible. And when we see almost 75, 80 million gallons of paint going waste, is truly something that we need to address. Second point here is that in the paint manufacturing, we see there is a huge amount of virgin raw materials that are being consumed. And should this 75, 80 millions, a significant portion of paint that can be reworked, we could see a significant reduction in the usage of virgin raw materials. The environmental hazards and the industry problems that we face today is the land, water, and even the air we breathe is affected by paint waste. Just to give you a perspective of it, that 1 gallon of paint that goes to landfill can affect the drinking water for almost 50 people. And the disposal of the paint in an irresponsible manner, just going in the landfill, can cause serious health concerns to human, to animals, to plant life globally. And lastly, we talk about the paint being disposed of, but truly there is almost millions of plastic, metal cans that also go in the landfill, affect our nature, our environment in a major adverse manner. So we talked about the adverse impact of the paint recycling, but of the paint in the paint industry. Now I would like to focus about the evolution of paint recycling, how paint recycling in our paint industry has truly shaped up in the last 10 years. And we have always been asked this question as to, when you talk about paint recycling, what is the most effective tool? How do we implement these programs? And my colleagues Brendan and Jeremy, they discussed about the paint stewardship programs. So I'm not going to go much into the detail of it, but we feel that the product stewardship programs are one of the most effective tools in addressing and creating a robust paint recycling program. And just to give a little bit of insight on product stewardship, I know Brendan spoke at length on this, but product stewardship truly, we believe, is a principle that brings all entities involved in a life cycle of product to take shared responsibility for reducing the environmental adverse impact of that product. And so once this product stewardship programs are established, how do we really implement this product stewardship? And we heard about the EPR model, and in extended producer responsibility, as the name suggests, it is not truly about putting the entire responsibility on the producers. We feel that all the stakeholders in the life cycle of the paint should have a shared responsibility. So when we talk about the life cycle of the paint, right from the manufacturer, the producer, the focus should be on making environmental friendly paint. The packaging are to be in a manner where recycling can be done. If it's a packaging of metal cans, then we know that metal cans can be recycled. But when we have mixed type of products in a same packaging, whether it's plastics and metal combined, recycling makes it difficult. So that kind of an awareness and a responsibility has to be taken by the producer to ensure not only the product, but the packaging is fully recyclable. when we talk about the retail industry should embrace more environmental friendly products. I feel the government needs to create level playing fields whereby producers are incented if they are coming with more of a environmental friendly paint, are producing products responsibly. And lastly, the consumers. If consumers are educated and if they are given a choice, then it is where I feel the consumers can make a big difference. And if all of these paint that are collected under the product stewardship programs, ultimately the consumers, given the choice and the ease, can make a huge difference in reducing the adverse impact on the environment. So we heard at length from Jeremy on the paint care. I will not go more in details, but the good news is that 50 million gallons of paint has been collected and recycled in now 10 to 11 states. And we have more than 1,000 collection centers that have been established. And these are some solid, robust programs through paint care that has been established, and more states are participating. So this is something definitely that we are all proud of, because this is in the last 10 years, huge impact has been done to reduce the adverse impact on the environment. So how is paint recycling being done? This is the main topic of our presentation today. And we are always asked the question, like, when we talk about paint recycling, is it just about collecting paint returns and mixing in a vat and then making a standard batch? But it's more than that. So I would like to focus a little bit and go into some details to discuss about how truly the recycling is being done. GDB, our company, we are in the paint recycling business since 1994. And so just this slide here explains a very basic but more of a detailed nature of paint recycling program. So the first step is the paint that is collected through the paint care program are received at one of the GDB's paint recycling center. Once the paint arrives at our recycling center, we sort the paint in the category of water-based and oil-based. And so that is the first step to make sure that all water-based products are sorted out. The second step is when the cans are opened, we inspect, again, it's a manual process to ensure that these cans do not have any kind of foreign particles, that the paint are not dried or they're gelled, or pretty much if the paint has become like solidified in the can. So those non-recyclable products are removed. The third step is to pour the paint in a more detailed manner, in the sense that we pour the paint by color and by sheen. So all the cans that are opened are now being sorted out into different color schemes. And further, it is sorted out in the sheen, whether it is a flat paint or it is a satin or semi-gloss. And after the paint is poured up, it goes through a high-speed dispersion where the paint is thoroughly mixed. And at that time, we add a lot of like additives, biocides to make standard colors. Colorants are added because in order to promote the sales of the paint, it is very important that standard shades are being provided to the consumers. So one of the important aspects is to add pigments to make standard shades. After the standard products are mixed and ready, it goes through a filtration process whereby under 300 microns, the paint gets filtered. And lastly, there is an extensive quality control and testing process that goes through to make sure VOCs are checked, the products are being checked for heavy metals, and overall that the paint pretty much is similar to the quality standard of ASTM. So there is a notion which I will discuss in my later part of the presentation about the quality of the recycling. Is recycled paint truly a good quality and a safe paint to be used? And that's the reason why we wanted to show you this detailed presentation, to really create an education and awareness about the recycled paint, that it is as good as any virgin paint. And lastly, the packaging, and to ensure that we do not use virgin raw materials. The packaging that are being used are from recycled plastics. So the sustainable model for paint recycling is the development of wide range of applications for recycled paint. It is not just about interior and exterior paint, but truly several different products have been reintroduced. For example, floor paint, roof coatings, and more R&D work is being done to ensure that we create products for more and more applications, but not only just the interior and exterior paint. One of the main aspect, or I would say the point that can really make the program successful, is the recycling of the off-spec raw materials. So raw material industries play a very important role, as they have raw materials which are either off-spec or discontinued. Those raw materials can be provided at economical value to the paint recycling industry, and it helps in a larger way to build and produce good recycled paint. And lastly, of course, the investment, or I would say involvement with the R&D, GDB. We are working with one of the leading universities, whereby graduate students from the polymer departments, they come and they do R&D work. We provide project internships, and that helps build a good technical program for the recycled paint. So overall, when we talk about paint recycling, just to sum it up, the first thing is the receipt of the paint, of the post-consumer paint, the leftover paint. Also from the industry, we get the off-spec or the distressed paint. Many times, paint manufacturers, if they have paint recall or they have discontinued any paint, or if there's a buyback from major hardware chains, all of those paint combined with the raw material that is available, together, the recycling, we produce economically eco-friendly paint that we market under the brand name Evolve. So GDB circular model here, helping build a sustainable future. Our main model is complete shift from waste management to resource recovery. We ensure that not only paint, but packaging materials, they do not go to landfills, and as much recovery is possible, that efforts are made there. Today, about 85% of the product that is being received at our recycling centers are being reused for rework applications. Certainly, this leads to reduction in consumption of virgin raw materials. The product life is extended through value addition, through adding more of the additives and raw materials to ensure that the product that is made has an extended shelf life. And overall, more recycling would mean lesser quantities of waste and packaging materials. So what are the challenges faced in the recycling industry? One of the major challenges that we see today in the recycling industry is the lack of acceptability of the recycled paint. There's a lot of recycled paint today available, but we are not able to see truly the hardware chains or the retail stores really embracing the recycled paint, and that is one of the big challenge. This is mainly due to the misconception that buyers have regards to the content and the quality, the performance of the recycled paint. Yes, they believe that, and they can see that the recycled paint is economically priced, but overall, because of this notion that whether it is a safe and a good quality paint, I think the buyers are not really embracing the recycled paint. So hence, the consumers need to be educated. And I believe that the paint stewardship programs that are being established, a lot of work is being done by Paint Care in really creating an education and awareness about the recycled paint, but a lot has to be done. The traditional stigmatic views of the recycled paint products are that, people feel that this paint is smelly, it may have a low coverage, it may have a rough finish, whether it is really safe to be used, what about the VOC? But the fact of the matter is that a good quality recycled paint truly has no odor, it has a good coverage, it can be pretty much compared to a good virgin paint that is being sold in the market, and it has high performance, and on top of that, there is a big price advantage. So what is being done and what are we doing today to really promote recycled paint? And because unless the recycled paint is embraced, people buy recycled paint, the overall future of the recycling industry is in danger. And the main thing that what the paint recycling industry today we have done is, with the help of PSI, an association was formed, which Brendan spoke earlier. It is the International Paint Recycling Association, and it consists of all of the major paint recyclers in North America. And we all have come together with a responsibility and with a task to truly create awareness about paint recycling, to let people know that recycled paint is a good alternate to virgin paint. And more than that, I think where a big significant progress has been made is for the virgin paint industry, there is ASTM, American Standard Testing Method Program, which basically signifies and stamps about the quality of a virgin paint. IPRA, our association, is coming up with a standard set up for recycled paint, whereby recycled paint will also meet a quality standard, and each can of recycled paint that is being sold in the market is stamped with the IPRA quality standard. So a consumer who makes a decision to buy recycled paint is now made aware, feels safe and confident that he's doing a right purchase by buying a good quality paint. So 1 gallon of recycled paint, to sum it up, it saves 100 kilowatt of hours of energy and keeps 115 pounds of carbon dioxide from the air. Paint recycling is truly a key to greener paint industry. A lot has been done, and I feel with the formation of IPRA and the members coming together, today we have 11 states that have passed the product stewardship laws. We are very, very confident that in the next 5 years, as Jeremy shared in his paint care presentation, many more states now are where the discussions are going on to pass product stewardship laws. And we feel very confident that more and more states will have these legislations. And hence, with this 80 million gallon problem that we face in the industry today, majority of that paint, the unused paint, the leftover paint, will be put to good use. And to talk briefly just about our company, we formed in 1993, as started with, in a very humble way in paint recycling. Today, in the last 25 years, more than 1 billion pounds of latex and oil paint have been recycled. We basically market our products under private labels. The paint is sold in the United States as well as overseas. And we have operations in various states in USA. To sum it up, with 25 years in the recycling industry, we employ 450 employees in North America, approximately 2 million square feet of paint recycling facilities, and we annually recycle more than 13 million gallons of paint. So this is basically truly to talk just a summary of how paint recycling is done and a perspective on the paint industry. And if there's any questions regarding paint recycling, I would love to answer. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Sanjeev. A great overview of a great company, great vision for paint being part of the circular economy. I got a question, and if anyone else has questions, please load them into our Q&A function on the Zoom here. So my question has to do with pandemic and supply chain disruption. I know that a lot of different commodities out there have had supply issues. Is paint one of those? And is that maybe an opportunity for recycled paint to get in there and fill the void?
That's a very good question, Jim. I will answer this in two parts. One is last year, there was a major struggle in the sense that we saw there was more of, I would say, availability of paint coming in, because when people were at home, the DIY market, as we all know, was at all-time high. People were using more paint, and hence there were more returns. But the challenge we had was really how do we manage the labor force during the COVID time, especially to maintain social distancing of 6 feet. And also we saw that our employees were skeptical to come back to work. There was, of course, a huge shortage of labor, and overall the whole logistics was so disrupted. So it was a major challenge last year. We as a company tried to do as much as we could to continue the recycling pace. This year, one of the good things that we have seen is there is a huge demand in the industry for paint, and hence our sales and even other companies that sell recycled paint, the sales have been very good, which is a very good news. More and more paint recycling is being done. But of course, all of us know that there is a major shortage of raw materials, and the labor problem still remains very high. So there are, I would say, it's mixed feelings, some good news, but at the same time, logistics and labor still remains a big challenge.
Great. Well, since I don't see any questions loaded up, I got another one for you. If you could tell us a little bit about your sales of recycled paint overseas, especially in the developing world. And my impression is that that a lot of the developing world doesn't have good paint manufacturing technology, and so our leftover paint, if you will, our recycled paint from the U.S. is actually in demand in some of the other countries around the world. Is that right?
That is absolutely right, Jim. I would say that one of the major, I would say, point why we see a demand of paint overseas is that water-based paint is, there's a big growth in the water-based industry overseas. As we have seen in America in the last 10 years, the industry has shifted there's a paradigm shift from oil to water-based. And we are seeing that same scenario overseas. So there's a demand for water-based paint. And especially when we are able to provide low-cost, high-quality paint, we see that there's a market there. Secondly, one of the big differences is that in the US, we have in-store tinting program. Our consumers here are offered thousands of shades, on a fan deck that you can choose. But in many countries overseas, there is still the sale of packaged colors that we saw probably 20 years back in the US. And hence, when we produce recycled paint in 10 to 12 shades, there is a market there. So customers are easily accepting those pre-packaged colors. And lastly, in the US, our paint industry is very, I would say, structured. 5 or 6 major paint companies control the market share, while overseas, there are several countries, for example, Spain, where it is a fragmented industry, where there'll be hundreds of small paint manufacturers. And these small paint manufacturers can really play a very pivotal role in taking the recycled paint, because what they could do is that they can take this paint in bulk and package it under their own private labels. So hence, there is certainly, we see a good market in overseas, but at the same time, what we've seen in the last couple of years, there has been a good acceptance, a growth in the domestic market. And our brands, we are, in selling into many discount stores on Amazon, and Habitat for Humanity. So it's only a matter of time that in the US itself, we will see a good demand for recycled paint.
Thank you. So there's a question about, do you promote and market recycled paint directly, or do you rely on private label retailers?
So we actually market our paint through various private label programs. And very recently, we have also started to actually have our own company-owned stores for recycled paint so that the consumers can get recycled paint with ease and convenience. We have several stores in Texas, Florida, and Nevada that have come up. And so that, it kind of serves a dual purpose. One, it allows consumers to have choice to go and buy paint from the store, but at the same time creates brand awareness and also educates people about environmentally friendly paint. So both, we are marketing under private labels, but we are also developing our own paint company-owned stores to promote our own brand name.
Here's a question about lighter shades, which you briefly mentioned on one of your slides as a challenge. Do you know of any academic research trying to solve the lighter shade issue?
That's a good question. And actually, it's an important one because shades is truly, I would say, a very important aspect of marketing or acceptability of the paint. As we all know that there is a bigger market for lighter shade paint. So one of the key things to solve that issue is in sorting. And the more, I would say, rigorous or more detailed sorting process is being done. And as you know, Jim, you are one of the pioneers who really started this whole paint recycling in America, and you have handled paint recycling. So this, nothing is hidden from you, that the more sorting is done, you will create more lighter shades. But when you bulk it up in a group of just bulk, like a red, you end up getting darker shades. And secondly, if there is availability of pigments like a white titanium dioxide slurry, that can be used to lighten the shades as well. So the effort is there to create more and more lighter shades, because lighter shades are much more acceptable in the interior market.
Okay, do we have some more questions here? So you mentioned briefly that there are misconceptions about reusing recycled paint. Here's a question about what are the most common misconceptions out there?
So one of the things that we hear is about the whole health and safety of the recycled paint. There is some sort of I would say, a hesitancy or skepticism about would you put a recycled paint in your home? Will it be safe for your children? Or will that smell bad? Or is it something that, you could put it in your house and live there day in, day out? So there is always this mental block, and that has to be lifted through education, through awareness, that a thorough, rigorous quality control programs are established before a paint is sold in the US. And this big step of IPRA, our association, working together to set up a quality standard for recycled paint, will go a long way in addressing this issue. So now we are trying to promote the labels in the market with an IPRA quality standard. So it kind of gives a seal of confidence to consumers that it is a good quality paint. It has gone through all the process. It is not only a better quality, but saves a significant amount of money to every household.
That's really great to hear that IPRA is really making some progress and really working on some ways to overcome some of those misconceptions. And that's really great to hear that the paint recyclers are banding together to do that. Well, that's it for questions. We do have another session coming up at 1:30, so I guess we can bring this to a close unless Jeremy or Brendan, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap this up? Okay.
I did just want to say thank you for having us. This was really informative for me, and I hope it was for other folks as well.
Great.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity, and want to thank NAMA for providing us this platform, especially to promote, our paint recycling. And we really wanted our association to be known out there so that people know that they, like as in plastics recycling or metal recycling, which has been done in the country for 3 to 4 decades now, and they have their association and their members really working hard. Similarly for IPRA, you providing us this opportunity, it means a lot to us.
Great. And Jeremy, anything?
Well, again, Jim, thanks for having me today, and I've been working now in this space for longer than I worked in almost any other space. So the deeper I get into it, the more I learn, the more that I learn there is to learn, and I look forward to working with Brendan and Sanjeev in the future. I work on the operations side of this program, but I'm so fascinated and interested about the novel solutions that others are coming up with to just deepen and make this even better. It's just the decade's a good marker to set a sort of like a this has been going on now for 10 years. I'm looking really forward to the next 10 years. It's just so much fun to do. I know it's sort of the symbol. Paint drying is the symbol for something that's sort of placid and not super exciting, but with the people who are involved in this, it's a heck of a lot more exciting than it has been ever. So great momentum, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you to all our panelists. We're seeing some great kudos coming in through the chat. If we were live, we would be given a big round of applause right now. So thank you, speakers. And coming up in just a few minutes, at 1:30, we have a session on myths, mysteries, and mistakes in HHW. That's an intriguing sounding title. I'll be interested to see what that's all about. And then after that, we have our closing social hour. Hope everybody can join us for that. So thank you so much, everybody. And we'll bring this session to a close now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you.